It's go time.
Edmonton Elks General Manager Ed Hervey
talked about the kind of people we want, the players that we want, and what we want our team to look like moving forward. Well, obviously in football, the most important position on the field is the quarterback position. You have to start there. And in starting there, you have to have someone that has the ability not only to play the position, but to also show the leadership that it takes, and also the upside and the potential.
Edmonton Elks quarterback Tre Ford.
Professional football, nothing's guaranteed, right? You have to earn everything. So having the opportunity to come in and play is all you can ask for at the professional level, right? And you got to earn everything you get. Nobody's going to give anything to you, right? If you go out there, walk out there, get ready to play Calgary, they're not going to say, here's your win, have it, right? So you got to go out there and earn everything you can get.
Welcome everyone to Third Down Gamble with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham, with special guest Andrew Hoskins of the Turf District podcast.
And welcome everyone back to Third Down Gamble. Don Charbin speaking, and Heath, as we've been talking the last few weeks, a lot of player signings. We're going to have Andrew Hoskins of the Turf District coming on the show just a little bit later to discuss what's going on in Edmonton. There's a lot happening there. But before we get to that, I want to talk to you about a theoretical question, and this is going to really, I hope, engender some interesting debate. The salary cap. We know coming out of 2024 that the BC Lions spent extra. Matthew Betts, Nathan Rourke, two parts of why they spent the extra money. But it was a Grey Cup year in their home park. They made a bid. They spent a little bit extra. Do you think that's a good philosophy? Do you think that's a bad philosophy to try to do that? Or do you think that's just the way things have to be?
I wouldn't put it as the way things have to be. I understand the reasoning for teams to go over the cap when they have a competitive team and the Grey Cup is in their backyard. I get it. And we can look back to the 2013 Saskatchewan Roughriders as a bit of a trendsetter in that they really loaded up for that home Grey Cup and they were successful. The BC Lions, as far as we know, and it hasn't been fully disclosed yet, but it sounds like they are substantially over the salary cap. This did not work out in their favor at all, and they struggled in the playoffs, an early exit, nowhere near getting to that home Grey Cup game. It's a trend, and if the league wants to do something about it, they need to impose harsher penalty, because right now, especially that first $100,000 over the cap, it's a dollar for dollar penalty, and there's not really much to dissuade a team from going over. Once you get above that, the dollar amount goes up, the loss of draft picks can affect you as well. And if they want to have it be more of a firm cap, that's where they need to start cracking down.
You're right. It's essentially up to 100,000 teams are fined $1 per dollar that they're over. So if you're over by 50,000, you pay a $50,000 fine. Over 100,000, but under 300,000 teams are fined double the amount that they exceed. Then over 300,000 teams are fined triple the amount that they exceed the caps. Over 100,000, you forfeit a draft pick. And this year, it's anticipated that the BC Lions will do so. The question was put to Kyle Walters of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because the Blue Bombers are going to be the host stadium in 2025. Do you or will you think about, discuss, or anticipate, maybe move to get over the cap, get some more talent on that field so that you can be in that game and maybe win it? Interestingly, Kyle Walter said there's been no discussion, but you certainly look across the field and you can certainly see what other teams have done.
You can, and it sounds like they're not opposed to going over the salary cap at all. The Bombers financially have been in pretty good shape. Winning does that for you as well. It's increased their attendance in the stands, so they're not really in a position where they're worried about the financial implications of going over the cap and paying that penalty. Again, I don't know exactly where I fall. I certainly don't fault a team in that first $100,000 range, and that can be the loss of one important player, and having to bring somebody else in can get you over that cap and in that range. Once you start going beyond that, it feels a little bit more like intent on, I wouldn't exactly call it cheating, but intent on stretching the rules a little bit. And that's where, again, if the league is serious about it, if they think this reflects poorly on the league, that's where they have to start really cracking down. A loss of a draft pick, we've seen very good results in first round draft picks in the CFL. We've seen very bad results of first round draft picks in the CFL. We've seen players that never even take the field. It's not as big of a risk as maybe the NFL or the NHL, NBA, where those first round draft picks are really highly touted and can jump into a lineup right away. We don't see that quite as often in the CFL, so you're not really risking a lot by giving up one draft pick.
You could argue that, but I will say, especially since probably about 2015, draft picks in the first round, I would say 75% made an impact in this league. The ones that didn't, and there are two parts to this, ones that never panned out, John Burke in Hamilton never panned out, but others that went to the NFL and haven't made their way back yet. Kyle Hergel for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, who's been cut by the New Orleans Saints, maybe on his way back. Don't know yet, has to clear waivers. The difference between the CFL and the NFL cap, and it's nuanced, and you have to remember this, is that CFL, it's year by year, so it's annum. So every fiscal, that cap, and they do a forensic audit, that cap is applied. In the NFL, and I could be slightly wrong on this of my understanding, but you get to mortgage your cap just a smidge, and I think they might take a 3-year amalgam, and over that 3 years, you have to be in that cap range. If you go from 2022 to 2024, you look at the money spent on the cap, on player salaries. If you look at that and you say over the 3 years, you do average out under the cap, you're golden. You're good to go. That's probably a very simplistic view of how they do it, but it's more of a lengthened review.
That's certainly a way to do it. There's other leagues that have a firm salary cap. There's leagues that have what they call a soft cap and a luxury tax, and Major League Baseball is a prime example of that one. If we want to talk the difference in dollars between CFL and Major League Baseball, it is completely ridiculous. There's a single Major League Baseball player who makes more than an entire CFL roster does in a season. So that's a big comparison, but it's similar in that it's a luxury tax. It's pay a penalty as you go over. Again, managing that cap and coming in exactly on or under the number is a pretty tough thing when you take into consideration injuries that can happen or the potential to bring somebody back that's cut from an NFL roster. And Matthew Betts is a prime example of that. The BC Lions wanted to get him back into the lineup and were prepared to incur this penalty to bring somebody like that back mid-season. So unless you build in a contingency and be under the cap waiting for those NFL cap cuts so you can add somebody in, you're going to be immediately over.
You're right about that, but most teams, when free agency is over and the draft is over and they've made their signings, most teams have had that buffer built in. So if the cap, let's say it's 5.5, you might have 500,000 left over that you can sort of work around and get somebody that's coming late from the NFL to fill the roster. The other thing, too, that you have to remember is that if a player is on a 6-game injured list and they do the complete 6 games on that injured list, that doesn't count towards the cap. However, that player's salary still is counted. And we documented on this show where Edmonton, for instance, back in the late 20-teens, were over the cap by $2 million, but legally so because they had so many players on 6 games. They had to bring in other players to fill the roster that they spent more money, but they did it legitimately within the rules. There was no issue with going over. Now, I don't necessarily think that it's cheating if you go over the cap. That's a risk that you take. You know what the foul is going in. It's the same thing as if I am lining up on the line of scrimmage and I decide that my team needs a break and I jump offside. I know I'm taking a 5-yard penalty, but at least I've given my defense a break. This is sort of the way I look at it, is that the cap is there to keep it a level playing field, to keep it as fair as possible. But if you want to make the bid, know that there are consequences, and everybody has signed off on that.
There are some ways around it as well. We have now the ability to sign players with marketing money incentives as well. I think the league has been upfront with that they will audit and make sure players that are signing these marketing money incentives are taking part in events that promote and market the league and the team. Otherwise, it would just be another way to slough off a little bit of extra here and there to a player. So I'm glad the league is keeping an eye on that. You also run the risk of teams manipulating that 6-game injured list as well. That I think needs to be monitored to ensure that that's not the case. And you mentioned Edmonton being well over, and I don't doubt that was the situation for them. But we see in some other leagues, there's players that mysteriously end up on the long-term injured reserve in January and are all of a sudden back in the lineup come playoff time in April. That seems a little bit more suspect, and it's something that the league needs to make sure that they've got a handle on before it has the opportunity to get away from them.
By function of the length of the schedule, you can't really do that in football. You sit around and keep a guy on the shelf for 2 months, your season may be over because you're not in the playoffs. It's not going to happen. The 6th game is there, and I don't think any of the 9 really play with it. You have times, though, that a player is put on the 6th game and they come off early. Well, then all of a sudden, those 4 weeks count against the salary cap. In 2023, for instance, the Blue Bombers, when they were cooled and ready to get going into the playoffs, they basically rested a whole bunch of players. They didn't have any option, though, and they had to pay for those players, even though they weren't dressed. And they went over the cap that year largely because of that game. They went over by 25,000, which isn't so bad, but you can see how it can catch you. And that's why this soft cap, it's a bit of a luxury tax. Because anytime you're penalized for money you spent, that's a luxury tax. Now, baseball is crazy. I mean, it's the amount of dollars you're talking about there, and it is many times a 2-tier system there because the big markets can spend all they want because they've got television contracts locally. I don't know how baseball is starting to share all that, but I know they're trying to drive towards that. It's huge for them to do that because small markets, Toronto, Seattle, Kansas City, how do you compete?
You can't, and that's the risk that the CFL takes as well. I don't see anybody in any market being that willing to spend ridiculous amounts of money year after year. We see it, as we've talked about, the year that you're hosting the Grey Cup. If it is a situation where you can spend a little bit over and try to get yourself into that game, fine. I would not anticipate the BC Lions continuing that trend for the years to come. I think they've got a pretty good handle on their roster now. They have signed Nathan Rourke to a pretty big deal, so that's something to watch as the full scale of that contract comes into effect. They'll have to really watch and balance the cap, but I don't anticipate them being 200,000 over in 25 or 26.
I don't know that they'll be 200,000 over this year either. I think they're probably pushing 100,000. The anticipation is they're going to lose a draft pick, which means they're going to jump over the 100,000. The Lions made a bid. They took a chance. It didn't work for them. And that's the nature of football as well. It's probably more precarious to spend the big bucks in football because injuries especially are the great leveler. If you've hurt your starting quarterback, as what happened in BC with Vernon Adams Jr. partway through the season, and then you have to rush in Nathan Rourke unprepared to play against the Blue Bombers, you're asking for trouble, and they found it. The Lions couldn't get over that hump as a result of that, and certainly with all the rhetoric that we hear from BC about mental toughness, this is addressing that whole situation in those 2-3 weeks where that all happened.
It is, and if memory serves me correctly, I believe in 22 and 23, there were 3 teams over the cap each year. All 3 teams in both years fell within that $0 to $100,000 range. So it's not a situation that is out of control yet. However, if we get into years where more than half the league is over the salary cap, it's time to probably make some changes and rein it in.
Why? Why do you have to make changes? If let's say that 5 of the 9 go over the cap in 2025 and go over, let's say, by each one $75,000. So no draft picks are involved, but they're all over by $75,000 among these 5. What's the problem? They're paying $75,000 in penalties. That's going to the teams that didn't go over the cap or to the league.
I feel it creates an opportunity for an arms race. I think if it's $75,000 over, then why don't you just make the salary cap another $100,000 more than it currently is?
You raise a great point right there. If you're the players and you're seeing this and you go, well, wait a minute, if it's a situation where the team is making a bid to go into the Grey Cup in their home stadium, for instance, we'll use that as the example, and they're saying, well, why don't you just overbid every year and overpay and bring in more talented people and pay me more for being here? Why don't you do that every year? And there's your dilemma right there.
Absolutely. That would create some more friction between the CFL and the CFLPA, because then you're talking consistently dollars, and the CFLPA is going to be looking at this and saying, if half the teams can spend this much, why are we setting the limit lower than, as opposed to increasing that amount and bringing everybody back up?
And that's something that will be in the discussion. I will not disagree with you if this comes up repeatedly. If we see 3 teams going over, and typically the max is about $20,000 to $40,000, that's not even a player salary. That's not a big deal. But if it starts to be a player salary, the 75 to 90 to 100, and that happens consistently, I could see the PA coming back and saying, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Why aren't we saying that maybe we should be at 5.6, 5.7, 5.8? They will get there in this contract, but it's not there today. This is the problem that you create if you're the BC Lions or if you're the Saskatchewan Roughriders, if people have argued from 2013, but other teams have done it as well. If you're pushing with that home date and you want to be there, you got to have this little sort of check in the back of your minds. Well, what message am I sending to my team, and what am I sending to the other players in the league if I'm trying to sign free agents? Right after the bumper, we're going to have Andrew Hoskins of the Turf District join us to talk about the coaching staff in Edmonton that's new, and, of course, the biggest splash Tre Ford has extended.
Hi, I'm Darren Flutie, and you're listening to the Third Down Gamble podcast.
All the way from the wonderful snowy climes of Edmonton, Alberta, it's the Turf District's Andrew Hoskins. Andrew, lots has been happening in Edmonton this off-season. Ed Hervey, new head coach, Mark Kilam, and now quarterback.
Yeah, it's been busy. Helps us be distracted from the immense amount of snow that is falling at this particular moment. Gives us happy thoughts as we're out shoveling ourselves out so that we can go anywhere. It's been pretty exciting, right from top to bottom. New people coming in, other than, of course, Tre Ford, but that was the big free agent that we weren't sure where he was going to end up. And luckily, he's back in green and gold. So pretty exciting times.
It was looking like there wasn't a lot of starting quarterback positions really opening up in the league. We saw some re-signings. Trevor Harris in Saskatchewan, for example. Davis Alexander got a bigger contract in Montreal. Tre Ford and Edmonton is the right fit, but I don't know if there was really many other places where he was going to go with a potential to start in that 2025 season.
Yeah, and we had kind of talked about that on our show as far as, okay, well, where could Tre end up? And some of the thoughts that came out were, is Hamilton going to continue to go with Bo? And we don't really know what that plan is there. And of course, Hamilton would be very close to home for Tre. So that one kind of made sense, and we're not really sure of still, what's going to happen in Hamilton. Those were the thoughts that we had, but I agree with you that if he wanted to be starting, that Edmonton was likely the best place for him. And obviously in his mind it was as well, because he signed the contract. So
I'm wondering, though, he would have been probably the biggest quarterback at play if free agency had come around and he was still available. And I'm wondering when the rumors started to appear that Edmonton was likely going to sign him, that Saskatchewan then said, okay, we're out of the market now. Trevor Harris, we're going to offer you a contract lower than what he's been making with probably incentives tied into it. But that the Rough Riders basically backed out of the what would have been the Tre Ford sweepstakes right away.
Yeah, I think that once they had announced Ed Hervey and Mark Kilam, and they knew that they had a chance to sit down and talk to Tre and see, kind of, give him what their vision was, it seemed like he wasn't packing up to leave right away. I think that was kind of a good indicator. I think that the fact is that Tre wants to be given the chance to be number one. And to me, the best part of this contract is that the first year is a little bit of a show me. He's getting more money for sure, but there is some incentive spots for him to play games and get through and help this team move forward. And then in year 2 and 3, it's starter money. I really like that. I think Ed made a really good move on that, to be able to sit down with him and say, okay, this is what we expect out of you. This is what we're seeing. And this is who we plan to, go after or bring in. Obviously, here's the deal that we want you to show us how good you are. And then we'll make sure you get paid for being that good. I like this. I think it's a good deal for Tre, and I think it's a great deal for the team.
I've been kind of talking about Tre Ford and the potential to re-sign pretty much since the Larry Thompson ownership announcement, in that it was obviously going to be a new direction for this team, and anybody coming on board needed to decide very quickly whether Tre was going to be their guy or not, and had to make him feel like he was going to be their guy. So I would imagine Chris Morris, Ed Hervey, everybody's put in that work and had those conversations with Tre Ford at this point, and he's got to feel pretty much welcomed back to the Elks organization. I know there was obviously some tension there between him and the former head coach, Chris Jones. They didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but is there a lot of positivity from everybody from the ground up at this point?
Oh, 100%. I think Elks fans, their biggest worry was that Tre Ford was going to be not here, and we would run into the situation again where we bring in a really talented rookie, we get through all the bumps and trying to teach him, and then have him have a great deal of success somewhere else. And as you mentioned, that there's a lot of rumors, nothing ever specifically confirmed about the relationship with the former regime, and it always seemed to me that G-Roy and J-Jack did have faith in him, but there was still that kind of lingering thing from Chris Jones. So it never really kind of, and Tre, it always seemed like I never felt like he was sad to be here, but he wasn't like happy to be here. It was just like, yeah, okay, I'm learning, right? And I think this group came in and said, no, we want to build this team around you. We want you to be the face of the team, and let's we'll put our money behind it and make it happen. So I thought it was, Elks fans in general were happy about all of the signings.
Well, let's walk back for a second and let's get back to Ed Hervey returning to the franchise. How did you feel about that? You knew what had happened before. They'd won a Grey Cup with him, but there was some tempestuous relationships with the media too.
Oh, absolutely. Before we get to Ed, I'm just going to jog back a wee bit to Chris Morris, because I think that's a key part of this story. Is no one saw Chris Morris coming in as the president. I'm very happy about it. He is a longtime Edmontonian, 3-time Grey Cup winner on the team, is on the Wall of Honor, understands what this team means to the community, understands what it means to be part of the team, and really brought that passion that we were looking for in the presidency. We were looking for passion to move forward, understanding the past and still wanting to bring this new era in to reflect the past. So I was very excited about Chris Morris joining. And when I heard it was Chris Morris, that was when the rumors ramped up that it would likely be Ed Hervey coming in. As you said, Don, the last time Ed was here, it wasn't always a smooth ride as far as the media is concerned. It wasn't even a smooth ride in the building because of the relationship between him and Len Rhodes not being so great. But the one thing Ed did very well was build a winning team. He built from the lines out. He was really, really good at finding receivers. And then he had Chris Jones that could find defensive guys, and they were able to build a team rather quickly and have some success. So Ed comes in this time, and his press conference to me was, this is that maturing process for Ed Hervey. He even said it himself. He said, I know last time I was here, what wasn't all rainbows or whatever he said, but he goes, but I know this role now. I know it's, I have to build a winning team, but we also have to be there for you guys and for you guys to tell our story. And he has definitely learned a lot in his time away. Lots of people, when he left Edmonton, were unhappy about him leaving Edmonton. Now that he's back, and he has this experience under his belt, I think that can be nothing but a good thing.
It's definitely a maturing and a learning curve, right? And I mean, I'm definitely not the same person I was 20 years ago. And I imagine anybody in professional sports does a lot of growing up. And I think of somebody like Jason Moss as well. We know he was very much a fiery head coach in his time with the Edmonton Elks. He has had a lot of success going to Montreal as well, and is still a fiery competitor, but he's a different person than he was in Edmonton. And I would like to imagine that Ed Hervey's had a similar growth path in his journey back to Edmonton.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at, so you talk about Jason Moss, rookie head coach at the time, absolutely fiery, passionate guy. Came out in ways that even he probably didn't want it to come out as he was that head coach. Took the step back, was the offensive coordinator, then went back to head coach with a new outlook. Because I even thought his last year in Edmonton, he had kind of gotten over it. He had made that step to understand the connection that he needed with the fans and the team, was really making it more of that family feel. But the thing is in Edmonton, he was just never going to get past throwing the Gatorade bottle. Like, everyone was just not ready to move on from that. He goes to Montreal, major difference. None of that is there. He's got those guys playing out of their minds, and he's just become a great coach. On the GM side, same kind of thing. Ed Hervey, when he was here, he was a rookie GM. Could he build a team? 100%. Was he still learning all of the other stuff that goes along with the GM role? Yes. And now he's had this other time between BC and Hamilton to kind of learn those things. And it sure seems that he has that as he's coming back here to have that success, hopefully, as a GM once again.
I just want to saunter back to Jason Moss and his time in Edmonton. You bring up an interesting point about the Gatorade, and he also had that set too with the special teams coordinator in British Columbia that one night. The one thing that I think about him is that, especially now that he's in Montreal, when he was in Edmonton, the pressure, I think, self-imposed on him because he had played for the team, played for them in a Grey Cup. I think he felt it much more than in Montreal, where he's more distant from what happened there and he can just be himself. And I think that helped him to just get out of that environment.
It could be that, but it could also be if you go back and watch when he started as the head coach, all of those things that you talk about, the outbursts and all those things, those all happened in the first season. In the second season, he had a yelling match with a referee because he made a bad call. In the third season, very little, right? He learned. But the problem was that the media here, media across the country, they all had the cameras focused on when's that next explosion going to be. I think he needed that year in the OC role to kind of not completely separate himself, but somewhat separate himself from that, and then be able to come in with a fresh set of eyes. Now, is the pressure there because he's here and he knows how much it means to the city and he knows how much it means when he was a player? Sure. I think, and maybe that Montreal thing does play a little bit into that, but I do think it's just a matter of maturity and understanding that when you're in any of these positions, you're not only a head coach, right? You're a head coach, you're a mentor to other coaches, you're setting the tone for your players, but you're also part of the marketing team. People need to, understand and appreciate what you do just as much as the players do. Well, maybe not quite that much, but pretty close to what the players are doing so that everybody's kind of on board.
Ed Hervey, the interesting thing about him in that press conference that I took away from was when he was talking about players and playing for the Elks and what it would take. You've got to have commitment, you've got to have drive, and you've got to follow what we're teaching. But one of the things he said, you come into my room and you say to me, I'm not sure I want to do this. He said, the easiest thing and the fastest thing that I can do is give you a plane ticket and ship you home. So he's going to be no nonsense. If you don't want to put out the effort, you're going to be packing your bags.
Now, I think that is a thing that Ed Hervey has had from the get-go. The guys that played for him in 2015 that talked to us said that the one thing with Ed is that you always knew where you stood with him. There was never a gray area. You knew exactly where you stood with him, and you knew that he would give you a fair deal if you gave the effort that he was looking for. And so not one player said that Ed wasn't fair to them. So I think that's just carried over. I think he was making it very clear that there was no passengers on this bus. Not a bad thing to set that tone early. Because the one thing I will say, further to that, is that in that press conference, we probably saw more of a human side to Ed Hervey than we've ever seen, whether he was here as a player or a GM, scout, anything, anywhere in the league. He had that human moment talking about his mom, but he was laughing. And even he said, I understand it's not all about winning, which I thought was hilarious, being what happened when he left. But he has got those lessons. And I don't mind being very clear with the players, but then understanding that, hey, this is also can be kind of fun and we are all humans and let's move forward to win. But it's okay to show our human side.
As a player, I think that's all you can ask from the general manager. I think the uncertainty of whether you're going to be there or not is something that weighs over a player's head, and to have somebody that's straightforward and is basically saying, you put in the effort, there's a spot here for you, is what the team is wanting, and it's going to motivate those guys to put out their best effort.
Absolutely. That's what they're looking for. You just need to put that balance in. That's what the GM is there for. Find good players, bring them in, and then tell them, look, you hit this point that I think that you can hit. I'll make sure that we keep you here and you're comfortable being here, right? So nothing wrong with that.
If anything that you gather from Chris Morris, he has repeated, and I think he's reacting to Chris Jones and what happened with Chris Jones. He has repeated that if you want to be here, you want to work for us, and you want to learn and play the game that we want you to play, there's a home for you here. He didn't say home in the sense you're a spot in the team. He wants guys to be in Edmonton.
Yes, absolutely. And because that's what they would do when he was playing. When he was playing, he was here. He would go to the practice was in the afternoon because he would teach in the morning. And then he would come in. That was what was set in that day and age. Hugh Campbell is the GM, right? Ronnie Lancaster here. It was okay. We'll find a spot for you and a home for you to be here as not only part of the team, but part of this community. And I think that's what he was relating to, is that, hey, we can make sure that you're here fully, not just here to play a game and go home.
Mark Kilam, interesting hire, gets released by the Calgary Stampeders. I half wonder, maybe Dave Dickinson saw the writing on the wall, maybe for himself, but maybe for Kilam, saying there wasn't going to be an opportunity for you here, but there could be somewhere else. Don't know. Kilam, energy guy, fiery guy. Players love him. Got a ringing endorsement from players when he was going through his interview process with Ed Hervey and Chris Morris.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I will say, because beforehand I was like, I don't want another rookie head coach. Like I was trying to, not that I guess I didn't really want to retread either, but I was kind of ready to give J-Jack that opportunity to say, okay, you had your rookie year, you made some rookie head coach mistakes. Now let's see you build off of that. Mark Kilam, though, coming in as a guy that with 20 years of coaching experience, was always the heir apparent in Calgary. And then everybody was shocked. I don't know about you guys, but I was shocked when he was let go out of Calgary. I know you said that, maybe Dave Dickinson thought there'd be a chance for him somewhere else. I'm like, no, there was a scapegoat there that happened. And he has a brother that needs a special teams coordinator job that just he now happens to have. Kilam coming back here. It was interesting when he was saying in his press conference that he's always played in green and gold, right? And when he was in junior, green and gold, high school, green and gold, college, the U of A Bears. So he is aware of the city. He is aware of the passion for the team because he was here playing on the university team. Fiery guy, it seems that way, but also seems to be a guy that can connect to players. And in this day and age, you have to be able to connect to players so that they want to run through the wall for you. The old style head coaching just really doesn't work anymore. It's why the head coach and GM positions being combined doesn't work anymore. Because as a head coach, you've got to be, you're great and we love this and you're going to do this and you're going to be amazing. And don't worry, we've got this and you're going to shoot the lights out. And then as the GM, you've got to be like, I don't really think you're worth that much. Like it's a dichotomy that they can't have anymore. Best of luck to Calgary in the way that they're doing it. But I do think that Mark Kilam knows a lot about the CFL. He knows a lot of players in the CFL. A lot of people that, of course, was huge on social media saying that they would play for him anytime, that this is well deserved. All of those things are awesome. I'm excited to see what his staff is. We've already heard the rumors of Jordan Maximic coming back as offensive coordinator, JC Sherritt coming in as defensive coordinator. Really, really interesting staff to bring in like that and guys that have connections back to Edmonton. I'm excited to see how that all comes together. I really enjoyed Mark's press conference. I've never met him, so I'm excited to get that chance to kind of talk to him. And he definitely has an infectious vision. So that's great. As an Elks fan who has done nothing but watch them not be that great over the last 4 years, probably will hold a little bit of judgment back until I can see everybody on the field and how they're being controlled on the field.
On paper, going back to the start of the 24 season with the Rough Riders bringing in Corey Mace as their head coach, we now have two more first-time head coaches in the West, in Mark Kilam and now Buck Pierce in BC. I really get the feel that each of these teams got it right. I see what Corey Mace did in Saskatchewan in 24, making some positive steps. Buck Pierce is a great fit for the BC Lions in that they've got Nathan Rourke that's maybe struggling to find his way a little bit, and you've got a veteran CFL quarterback and a proven offensive coordinator now stepping into that role. And you're right, the passion and the fire that Mark Kilam brings and his connections to Edmonton seems like a great fit. So I think all three of those teams have done a fantastic job in finding their guy.
Absolutely. And I think there is, in each spot, those guys are going to bring excitement to the players, but they're also going to bring an excitement to a fan base. Kilam seems like a guy who you could just go and have a beer with. He's okay, let's have a conversation about football. Just seems like kind of a cool dude to hang out with. We haven't had a coach that could be that connected here in a while, I don't think. To me, that's kind of exciting. You said even in Buck Pierce, giving that little bit of youth out on the coast with a proven offensive mind. It should be interesting to see what they can do with the weapons they already have. This offseason is very interesting, and starting with head coaching changes and young head coaches being there. The next to fall is where do all these players land? Going back to our original conversation, I'm very glad they locked up what I feel was the top free agent in Tre Ford before we even got close to February.
Ford if he'd have gone to free agency, I swear there would have been a feeding frenzy, because Winnipeg has to look at their future. Saskatchewan has to look at their future. And, of course, obviously Edmonton was going to be concerned about their future. So you had at least 3 bidders right off the top without considering anybody else. I thought Ford would change the market, but he did do a team-friendly first year, certainly gets better pay the last 2 to get his money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go a little bit farther back to say, not terribly surprising, but the first card kind of dropped when Vernon got traded to Calgary. We knew that VA was going somewhere, but him going to Calgary kind of then was like, okay, so what are our next options? It's obviously looking like Ford was going to be here, so then all the things fall. Although we're not maybe going to get as exciting of a quarterback carousel as we might have wanted, I'm at this particular moment, I'm okay with that. Other than VA being in Calgary, oh, that's just sad. I do think that it definitely will make those next guys, the top receivers, Justin McInnes, guys like that, where are they going to end up? That should be an exciting time as we get into February.
It's nice to see some stability at quarterback. I mean, CFL fans complain about players changing teams every year and you never get a connection to somebody. So to see pretty much the same starting quarterbacks continuing next year, I guess the big change is the trade of VA to Calgary. Davis Alexander signing in Montreal kind of indicates that Cody Fajardo might be on the outs, but we're starting to see that consistency. And Alexander signed a 3-year contract as well, so they're locking him up longer term. Great for the league to kind of breed that familiarity.
Well, and Chris Morris talked about that at his press conference, is that we need to have some consistency. Coming from a guy that played here for 15 years, you want to have some of those guys that you know and you can relate to. Getting a Tre Ford on a 3-year deal where he's already been here for 3 years and has quite a following. A lot of people already have Tre Ford jerseys. Now they know that jersey's good for another 3 years. So it goes a long way, right? So I'm curious how Chris Morris manages that, just because of the way that the CFL is with these rotating kind of 1 and 2 year contracts. If Ed Hervey is able to come in and say, okay, we need this stability, so we're going to try and get these guys here. When we look at Edmonton, guys like Niles Morgan and Geno Lewis are coming free agents. Where are those guys going to rate in this particular group, and what are they willing to give to have that stability and close the revolving door, as Chris Morris said? Be very curious to see how this plays out, but I love that there's more teams with a bit more consistency. It makes it so that you don't feel so bad about buying a jersey.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, because it's great you buy a number with a name on the back, and then the next year you have to rip the name off and put another one on. It's much nicer if you have the same quarterback there for a few years. And typically it's the quarterback that's the face of the franchise. Once in a while, you do have a defender or receiver that takes that mantle, but for the most part. And Cody Fajardo, as Heath brings up, where's he going to go? It's a tough question. Does he stay with Montreal, maybe take the pay cut, stay there in the case of an injury? I'm set up here, I'm good to go. Or do you look somewhere else? Because I don't think he's going to get a starting job anywhere else in this league. Some discussion, I've heard rumors for him going anywhere from Calgary to Edmonton to Saskatchewan to Winnipeg. It seems like everybody out west would be the interested party.
Yeah, it's tough to say where he ends up. I think he's at a point now where, like you said, I mean, there's not really a starting role unless, like I said earlier, if something wild is going on in Hamilton and they decide that they want to go in a different direction after they have the finalists for the East finalists for the MOP. You just never know where that's going to end up. So there's a little bit of, because there's guys like him, there's guys like Mazzoli that are going to be a free agent. Where does a guy like that end up? Because obviously Drew Brown is number 1 in Ottawa. We know that. Where do guys like Arbuckle end up? The just MVP of the last Grey Cup. We obviously know who's starting in Toronto. So yeah, lots of interesting spots for people to go.
Jake Maier's another name that comes up, right? With the trade for VA, it's pretty clear that he's on his way out of Calgary. Now, not a proven winner necessarily in the CFL, but somebody who started every game this past season and has showed some durability. He's got to have some eyes on him as a second quarterback as well.
I'd have to think so, just because if Jake Maier had a good offensive line in front of him and had time to get the ball out, I think he'd be okay. I'm not saying he can light the world on fire, but he did have some games that he put up some numbers. I just don't think he had a great cast around him in this past year. I think he's got a backup role somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where that ends up being. I could see when if we're talking about Edmonton, I think they would look at somebody like Mazzoli, because it's pretty much the same kind of player, same type of play as Tre Ford. I shouldn't say same type of player, because there's a years difference and lots of injuries difference, but at least you don't have to change your offense when you bring in Mazzoli. Does Saskatchewan stick with Shea Patterson, or does Saskatchewan look at somebody like a Jake Maier that is very similar to a Trevor Harris, who can sit back there and throw the ball? I'm not sure. It's now the backup quarterback carousel instead of the starters that we thought it might be.
Andrew, thanks for coming on. Where can people find and follow you on the socials?
Absolutely, and thanks for having me on once again. I always love chatting football with you guys. You can find our show at the Turf District, or you can find us even on Blue Sky now at Turf District Pod. We are in our winter break, but we will be back to break all of the news down in about mid-January. We usually go on Tuesday nights. You can join us live on YouTube or on Twitch, or grab the show later on all of your different podcasts.
Third down.
Thanks again to Andrew for joining the show. He's always a great guest, and there's a couple things that came up in that discussion I want to get to. Number one, the Cody Fajardo situation. Fajardo, I don't know what you have to do. He leads the team to a Grey Cup in 2023. But for a hamstring, would he have been MOP of the league this year? Had that hamstring injury not happened when it did, took him out for so long? And even with that, you get a situation where he may not be on the team.
The Alouettes needed to make a decision on their future. They got 7 years younger at starting quarterback by signing Davis Alexander long term. That was what they wanted to do as a franchise. Unfortunately for Cody Fajardo, it does leave him tentatively on the outside looking in. I agree he was a front runner for MOP before his injury. We saw what Davis Alexander did when he stepped in. The team continued to roll. A tough break for Cody. I don't know what his future is. We talked a little bit with Andrew about number one quarterback position seeming to be solidified, but there could be quite a shuffle in number two roles. And where does he fit into that situation? There's a lot of possibilities out there.
The Alouette situation is fascinating because even Danny Machocha had come out and said, I'll do what I can to see if I can land you with another team that has a starting position. Fajardo had kind of indicated to the team prior to this season, he said maybe two more and that's it. So essentially, if you're going to get Fajardo, you're getting him for a season and that's it. He wants to move on. He's got young children. His wife has a thriving business. I imagine there's a lot of pulls to be there.
100% there is, and we talk about that a lot with many different players. McLeod Bethel Thompson is another one that stepped away from the CFL to be closer to his family in the U.S. for a year. He did come back for one more season in Edmonton. Again, now that they've signed Tre Ford long term, is McLeod even in the CFL? There's a spot for Cody Fajardo. It might even be back with the BC Lions if we're talking 1 year. He could be the guy behind Nathan Rourke. He's a proven player. He's a bit of an insurance policy for any team that feels they're competitive if there is a problem with their number one quarterback or an injury that takes them out for more than a game or two. You've got somebody quite capable of stepping in and maintaining a team as opposed to really falling off the ledge.
And that's what you could argue with the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Trevor Harris. Trevor Harris, at best, is a Midland quarterback in terms of win-loss. He's 58, 52, and 2 over his tenure in the CFL. We chronicled last week how often he is injured, and you mentioned and you gave a strong list of how many people have played more games in the last 5 years than has Trevor Harris. Zach Collaros, who was supposed to be the glass doll that was playing for the Blue Bombers, has missed a couple games here and there, and that's been it. But for Trevor Harris, he did take a bit of a pay cut to get back with the football team. And I'm certain, as I indicated with Andrew, that when Tre Ford came off the list, the Riders said, okay, there are no more starters that we're going to chase, so we've got to figure out what we're going to do. They haven't re-signed Shea Patterson. This is a great question. Is it they've sort of sailed on that notion, or are they just waiting to see what else is out there? Because you mentioned in that segment, it could be the carousel of the backups, but who among the backups is going to move? Is Mazzoli going to be even considering playing anymore? Is Jeremiah Mazzoli done once he comes to free agency? He said, thanks everybody, I'm out of here.
Well, if we look at the Ottawa Red Blacks, Drew Brown is anointed as the number one guy. They've got Dustin Crum in a backup role there as well. So again, getting many years younger than Jeremiah Mazzoli, to have somebody like Dustin Crum as your number two guy. We look at the Toronto Argonauts. We know Chad Kelly is going to be out for the beginning of the season again. Does Cameron Dukes just assume that role? Do they keep Grey Cup MVP Nick Arbuckle around? There's some question marks there. Who is going to be the backup now to Davis Alexander in Montreal? Caleb Evans, does he step back into that role again, or does he look elsewhere? We've got Jake Dolagala that was released by the BC Lions, signed in Winnipeg. He's going into free agency. Chris Strevler blew out his knee. How healthy is he going to be? There's question marks for the number two role in Winnipeg. Pretty much every team is a question mark, and I would not be surprised to see a lot of movement in that second string quarterback position.
Cameron Dukes and Nick Arbuckle, that's an interesting situation because Chad Kelly is not going to start the next season, most likely with the Argos. Again, it may not be a 9-game situation where they went through this in 2024, but in 2025, he may be gone for 5. Somebody's got to be the starting quarterback. And I know that Ryan Dinwiddie has stated categorically he wants Nick Arbuckle back on that team. Where does that leave Cameron Dukes? Does he say, well, maybe these doors are closing for me here. I've got to start looking somewhere else. In Hamilton, Bo Levi Mitchell wants to be paid more. They've got Taylor Powell there. Is he now going to be the guy that needs to start? Because he's been there a few years. It's sort of the Davis Alexander, Tre Ford situation. They've been around, should be ready. If you do that and you say to Bo, okay, we're paying you, then does Taylor Powell at the end of that say, well, okay, get me out of here?
He does, and I think there are a couple of prime spots for a number two quarterback going into next season, and that would be Winnipeg and Saskatchewan for sure, because Zach Collaros is signed through 2025. The big push is to have the Grey Cup in Winnipeg, as we discussed. He's going to want to be a part of that. I don't see Zach Collaros sticking around beyond 2025. Winnipeg needs to find their next guy, and if you're somebody like Taylor Powell, you feel you've run your course in Hamilton and you're not getting a fair shake, Winnipeg's got to look pretty good to be able to step into that team. Again, you mentioned the Saskatchewan Roughriders and Trevor Harris. He's going to be 39 years old come training camp. If not Shea Patterson, then who in Saskatchewan? And that's got to be looking pretty good for somebody as well.
Well, Jack Cohn is there. I think of the Zach Collaros situation, and it's the first time that I can recall, and maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, that he has mused with the media publicly that he may not be back for training camp the following season. Now, it has nothing to do with his health. It has everything to do with his family. And so many of these players, we tend to forget that as you play this career of yours in the CFL, NFL, wherever, your family is often left behind, or if they do come with, it's a major change all the time. He's looking at this and saying, well, my kids are growing up. I want to be there more for them. That's not unreasonable. He's made good money in the CFL. He's probably going to find a good job soon after. It's just the question of, with that dangling carrot out there, Winnipeg hosting, does he use that as the main motivation?
It lured Stanley Bryant back for one more go-around, so I wouldn't be surprised if it does lure Zach Collaros back. Again, I would not anticipate him signing anything beyond 2025 at this point. Were Winnipeg not hosting the Grey Cup in 2025, I would be a lot less surprised if Zach Collaros retires in this offseason. I do expect him to be there for this next season, but again, Terry Wilson had one pass attempt during the regular season, a couple more in the Grey Cup. Are they confident enough in him as the future for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, or do they have to find somebody else? And who is that going to be?
And this is the huge issue for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. The drop-off between Zach Collaros and whomever number 2 is right now is huge. If Collaros decides to retire, or by some circumstance he can't start next season, what do you do? The Blue Bombers finding that backup that could really work well, other than Drew Brown, who was there, but they knew they couldn't keep him given that Zach was going to keep playing.
Drew Brown is definitely the one that got away. Before that, they had Chris Strevler, they had Sean McGuire. Neither one really got an opportunity to be the number 1 guy. Strevler did, but he's a different kind of quarterback and not one that you can count on for an 18th game schedule to be the guy. I think he has a purpose and serves a role on teams certainly, but not to lead an explosive offense. When you look at the tools and the weapons that Winnipeg has in receiver and running back, Chris Strevler's not the guy to dish the ball out to them.
If we just stay for Winnipeg for one more moment, Toby Jones gets signed. He's going to be the middle linebacker of the future. Where does that leave Adam Bighill? He's an FA coming up. He wants to keep playing, but now is Winnipeg no longer the destination?
Adam Bighill also just made partner in a wealth management company in the past week as well, so he does have something to fall back on should it not work out as a player. I would hate to see this be the end for Adam Bighill going out because of a really bad injury. I would like to see him walk off on his own terms. At the same time, Tony Jones came in and did a phenomenal job at middle linebacker for the Blue Bombers. He's not a young player by any means either. I believe he's early 30s as well, but he does bring a lot more mobility than you're seeing from Adam Bighill. I see a future in coaching for Bighill as well if he wants it. He's somebody that can inspire. He was the general out there on defense in both BC and Winnipeg for many seasons and really ran those defenses. Everybody on the field looked to him for guidance. It's a natural fit into a coaching role. I don't see him being an impact player in 2025. He may suit up, but it's certainly not the number 1 guy at middle linebacker and anywhere in the league that I can see.
And it would be a shame. I just can't see him, even though he's got that partnership, that he wants to leave the game behind. He's just too much of a gamer. Hopefully, if it's not Winnipeg, it's somewhere where he feels that he can contribute and start.
It would seem kind of bizarre to see him on any team other than BC or Winnipeg at this point, especially as it's likely to be a one and done. You hate to see a player that's got a legacy and a reputation in a couple of teams that he's probably well deserving of a Ring of Honor spot in both of those cities, and it would just seem to be a sad way out if he ends up somewhere like Hamilton or Ottawa where there's really no connection for a one and done.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.